I'm very happy to be able to welcome our keynote speaker to the virtual stage today. Michael Peter Edson is a strategist, consultant, and thought leader who's working at the forefront of digital transformation in the cultural sector. Michael was previously the director of web and new media strategy for the Smithsonian Institution, as well as the co-founder of the Museum of the United Nations, UN Live. Recently, Michael has been working with startup museums in both Europe and Asia, and he also led a workshop series and a study on digital transformation in light of COVID-19, a very relevant topic, for Europeana, which is Europe's platform for digital cultural heritage. Today, Michael will be speaking to us about the role of cultural institutions in our digital future. And with that, I'd like to give the virtual stage to Michael. Welcome.
Thank you, Joanna. That was a great introduction, and it's a pleasure to meet you virtually. I wish I could be there physically with all of you, of course, maybe next year. So I'm going to do the clicking of clicks to share my screen. So, hello. Congratulations to absolutely everybody who received an award. It's really heartwarming to see all of these tremendous applications and the selection criteria emphasizing collaboration, multi-institution partnerships. It's really fantastic, and I was blown away to hear during the introduction to today's convening that there were 500 applications. That's pretty great. So take a bow, everybody. In working on this session with Julia over the last few months, we came up with 3 questions that seemed pertinent to address here. The first one is, what does digital society look like in the future? The second one is, what roles should cultural institutions play in that future? And then how can cultural institutions shape and respond to digital change? Now, often when I'm trying to solve a big, hard problem, which seems to be all of the problems these days, or all of the questions these days, one of the first things I tend to do is create a problem space. And a problem space is just a kind of in my mind, it's a 3D representation of all of the issues and challenges and solutions that I might be working with. It's a way to organize. So let's drop these 3 questions into this problem space that we're going to work with. I'm going to try and talk for about half an hour, and then we'll have 10 or 15 minutes for questions, discussion. I think you could also add to this problem space a lot of other stuff that's in the air that we know from talking with digital practitioners, museum practitioners, directors, leaders, people in civil society, people in government, funders over the last few years. And once you have kind of a rough draft of a problem space, the cool thing about a problem space is you get to turn it around, almost like one of those trompe-l'oeil sculptures that looks like nonsense until you line it up a certain way, and then you can see it's a portrait of a beautiful man or woman, or a picture of a gun, or a scene from history. So you pick up this problem space and you start turning it to find useful perspectives. And maybe for your institution and your skills and the project you're working on, this alignment of ideas jumps out. Your mission as a museum, the climate emergency, which is, and working intensely in your local community. Or maybe it lines up this way. You're thinking broadly about digital society, disinformation, and culture writ large. I've found in the last few years of work in particular, that there, in any problem space in digital culture and civil society organizations, there are some unavoidable characters that show up. It's almost like they're part of the chemistry of the atmosphere that we're working in, the milieu, the zeitgeist. One of these issues is the relationship between scope, scale, and speed. Scope is what an organization or individual can choose to work on. Scale is how big that work can be or how deeply it can affect a person or a community. And speed is how quickly we move. I'll talk more about that later, but this is a biggie. Another is the relationship between now and the future. We used to have time to plan and build big structures before now happened. And that future has now in many ways crashed into us. I've found a group of, I say, false dichotomies that are in this atmosphere. The difference between working bottom up and top down, global and local, digital, physical. There are a handful of others that are unavoidable here that you need to think about. The difference between awareness, knowledge, and action, work that matters, outcomes that matter. And finally, the sort of the nominal theme of this talk, this idea of a civic handshake. And I'll explain that later in the talk. But first, to kind of jumpstart the session, Andreas, will you play this this video for everyone?
Yo, what is up, Fortnite? What's up, Pleasant Park? My name is Marshmallow, and thank you for coming out today and making history with me. You guys ready? Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go! All right, when this song drops, I want to see everybody jumping with me. I want to see you jumping. Let's go!
Hey, Jibo, do your favorite dance?
Definitely this one.
Hey, Jibo, I love you.
I don't know what I'd do without you.
So this is my Biden-Harris 2020 rally at Surfland, featuring guest speaker Bernie Sanders. Hello.
Some people don't know who you are.
Oh, of course, everyone. My name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I am the Congresswoman for New York's 14th Congressional District.
I need to ask, do you know how to turn on the power in Frantic Factory in Donkey Kong 64?
I never owned an N64, but I used to go to my cousin's house all the time. And she had Super Mario 64, Pokemon Snap, and probably a handful of other things. I didn't even know I recorded myself.
Ma'am? Ma'am? I can't kill Pokey. She's so nice. Are you safe, ma'am?
Okay, I think I have to do it. Sorry, Pokey.
It was an honor. It was an honor.
It's a no-brainer. Trans rights are civil rights are human rights.
Alexandria, you are giving a lot of people a lot of hope right now.
Thank you.
I'll take the stage back. Okay, so go do your projects now. I have said everything that there is to say now about our role in the digital future. So, you know, what was that and who am I again? I'm Michael Peter Edson, Twitter, website. I'm pretty easy to track down online. I have 30 years experience in museums now. My first job was at the Smithsonian Institution cleaning plexiglass cases for exhibitions. And then, like a lot of people who were doing other things when the internet got interesting, I started working on technology. founded and led new media departments for 3 or 4 of the Smithsonian museums, and then became the institution's director of new web and new media strategy back in 2008, something like that. And at that moment, we helped to transition the Smithsonian Institution 23 Museum and Research Center, the largest museum and research complex in the world. We helped to transition the Smithsonian from being an exclusively or predominantly inward-looking, expert-driven, top-down institution to one that was networked, aspirationally networked, bottom-up and top-down together with a faster and more open model of knowledge creation. I helped found a new museum in partnership with the UN, the Museum of the United Nations. There's a nice TEDx talk about the founding vision of that institution and its global bottom-up action-oriented model of content and change. I'm currently working in a similar institution, the Museum of Solutions in Mumbai. Mumbai is one of the world's mega cities, and this is Mumbai's first, perhaps India's first institution that involves young people in the crafting of solutions to make themselves a better future. Some of the materials from the museum to give you a sense of the bottom-up and participatory and networked flavor of that institution. Oh, and I can't forget, we're recruiting for a head of design, head of exhibit creation for that museum. So if you or someone in your network has some exhibit design and concept development skills, please get in touch. I think it will be the adventure and the project of a lifetime. Another institution I'm working with, all of these are very community-driven and hybrid digital physical institutions. I've also been doing a lot of research on the dark side of the web, and perhaps we can talk about that some during the Q&A. In COVID times, I've been working with institutions on COVID-specific digital strategies and frameworks. This one we developed with the National Gallery of Denmark looked at the home as a new kind of platform and tried to articulate a role for the institution as with the culture as one of the voices that would determine how society handles COVID and what we do coming out of it. That was a very fulfilling project. I was also a grantee from the Aspen Institute to work with 10 cultural and performing arts institutions across the US to develop short-term interventions to address the effects of COVID in communities. It goes on and on and on and on. And I think the characteristics and the research, the thought process that these programs reflect, one is that the dark matter of energy on the internet is open, social, peer-to-peer, read-write. It's the 99% of the cosmos of culture that happens all around us on the web, but that institutions have a difficult time seeing. Scope, scale, and speed, that we are in fact living in a new age of scale, where the scope, scale, and speed of change is accelerated beyond the capacity of most organizations to metabolize and act upon. From those two bodies of work, some thoughts about making change happen within cultural institutions and across the sector. And then really the beginning of a tactical guidebook for how to make that change happen more quickly and more impactfully if you're in charge or working in a cultural team. Think big, start small, move fast. And I think you can dump this, all of that work is available up on Medium or my blog or SlideShare, but I think you can dump all of those things into this problem space that we're working on to approach Julia's question about the digital future, digital culture, and the obligations of cultural institutions. To further fill up that problem space, I want to tell 3 quick stories. The first is deep breath. The first is about a research project that the Urban Institute did in the United States in the 1990s about cultural participation in underprivileged communities in America. So the researchers went to Oakland, California, and they started doing interviews with people on the street. They asked them, where do you get your culture? And invariably, people on the street answered that question with, well, we don't have that stuff around here. We don't do that culture stuff around here. Defeated, the researchers went back to their offices and rethought the question. They went back to Oakland a few months later and they asked the question this way: tell us about the creative people in your community. And when they asked the question this way, they got an immediate outpouring of love and affection and enthusiasm for the artists, rappers, writers, singers, composers, musicians, poets in their neighborhood. The problem wasn't that there wasn't culture in Oakland, California. The problem was that the people of Oakland, California didn't associate their cultural inner lives with the institutions that were created and funded to serve them. The next story is about a talk I gave, a class I gave at the University of Oklahoma in 2015. I dropped in on a digital humanities master class involving undergraduate students from across the university. And I just happened to arrive on the day that the students had been assigned to present their critiques of well-known humanities websites. One of them was assigned to talk about the Digital Public Library of America, the DPLA. And this kid was clearly the smartest kid in the class. And he said, great, Digital Public Library, free cultural digital resources. I went to that website. I entered in the name of my favorite book, Cannery Row by John Steinbeck. I hit search and I got back 10 pages of results, none of which was the book, all of which was sorted in descending order of the institution and catalog ID number of the resource. And I immediately said, the kid sat there and said, I immediately said, this is not for me. This idea that what cultural institutions are doing online is not for me is kind of pervasive. I think it came out very clearly in these sense-making workshops that Jasper Visser, my colleague, and I did with the Europeana community. We worked with about 63 Europeana network members over 3 weeks in a series of workshops. And the sense that we got very strongly was that the response of cultural institutions online after COVID was very overwhelming. The public wasn't so interested. The people who work in the institutions weren't so interested in just another online catalog page or another online exhibitions. The projects that moved them tended to be from smaller cultural entrepreneurs, a local bakery that started video blogging about the work that they were doing and the lives of the people who work in the kitchen, playful interactions from students and young people. This was the life of the community, not the official public face of our beloved official institutions. The last of these stories I want to run through is I've been privileged to be a juror on the MacArthur Foundation's $100 million 100 and Change initiative. A few years ago, the MacArthur Foundation thought, what if instead of splitting up $100 million across 20, 30, 50 projects and let a lot of people take small bites out of a big problem, what if we give one huge grant to one coalition and see if they can really solve a problem from top to bottom? Fascinating idea. So I've been a juror for 2 rounds of that. And one of the things that really struck me about that program was that with the big problems we face, $100 million doesn't go very far. In one project I read, it was about the child welfare system in the United States of America. The child welfare system in the USA is a $60 billion a year problem. That's what we spend on child welfare in the US. The grant amount per year was 1/600th of that scale of a problem. Another grant I read was to solve the problem of cervical cancer in Africa. It's a very preventable disease. $100 million goes about as far as a pilot program in West Africa to solve a horrific and very solvable problem like that. So it's not all about the money sometimes. Finally, This is an anecdote from the book Art and Fear by David Bales and Ted Orland. And in this story, a college pottery teacher walks into the classroom on the first day of class and says, okay, everybody, I'm going to grade you on the last day of class 2 different ways. Everyone on the left side of class, I want you to give me 1 perfect pot on the last day of class, and I'll give you a grade based on that pot. Everyone on the right side of class, bring in every pot you make this semester, and I'll weigh them with my bathroom scale. If you make 100 pounds of pots, I'll give you an A. If you make 80 pounds of pots, I'll give you a B. And what became apparent after just the first week of class was that by far the best, most insightful, most innovative, most creative, most useful work was coming not from the group assigned to quality. They were sitting around thinking about perfection. The best work came from the group assigned to quantity. Those workers were just, those students were just rolling up their sleeves and beginning to get work done. I think this tells us a lot about the mindset of cultural institutions who have a fascination with perfection, and the kind of more looser, more risk-loving, more interactive, loving way of working that's going to help your project succeed here. So dump all of those ideas into this problem space. And then what on earth was that video that I shared? The first clip was the Fortnite Marshmallow virtual concert. Fortnite is an online gaming platform played by 300 million active users. Back in February 2019, they had a concert. 10 million people attended this concert. They didn't just tune in to view it. They were there dancing in the bodies of their familiar avatars. They were there, 10 million people, and I'm pretty sure none of you have ever heard of that. I certainly hadn't ever heard that that happened, but there it is. Jibo, a social robot. Jibo was programmed not to be primarily a useful home assistant like one of the Amazon Echo devices, but to respond to groups and individuals socially through gesture. One of the remarkable things about Jibo was during testing, subjects who were interacting with it refused to leave the room until they had personally said goodbye to Jibo the robot. We form bonds as human beings with all sorts of entities. Some of them are online, some of them are in person, some of them aren't even real people. They're robots. The first piano clip was a Bach prelude that many of you recognize. The second clip was composed by a computer. And people become very hostile and angry when they're told that the piece of music that moved them was actually created by an algorithm. In fact, there was a competition about 20 years ago between a computer, a Bach composition, and a living human competition. An audience on the West Coast of the US heard all these performances and was asked to decide which they thought was which. Invariably, people thought the live human composer was the robot. The robot was Bach, and Bach was the robot. Why I bring this up is to say that the boundaries between what we think of as creativity, emotion, digital platforms, all those things are changing and bending very, very quickly in very profound ways. The in-person physical experience is not everything that we humans think it is. American political campaign being conducted on an Animal Crossing, which has also been used for Hong Kong activist protests, Black Lives Matter protests, all of this happening out in plain view, but pretty much under the radar of cultural institutions. Second to last is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, immensely talented politician and very wonderful human being, dropped in to play Among Us, an online game where she had to kill one of her game players. This is the screen grab from the moment that she killed someone on the spaceship. I think 700,000 people tuned in to watch her play this game, talk about politics. She also dropped in on a Twitch live stream, Twitch Donkey Kong 64 live stream benefit for trans rights. Unpack that sentence for you. She dropped in on this live stream and helped raise about $300,000 or $400,000 for English charity that helps trans youth. These are remarkable cultural moments. And finally, Uptown Spot. Uptown Spot is a Boston robotics creation that performed this amazing dance. The programmers were very apologetic, saying, well, we took 40 takes to compose this and perform this dance. Well, many human performers rehearse for a lifetime and take many, many, many more takes to perfect a dance routine, a scene, a ballet. This is not an unusual thing. So this collapsing of digital, physical, big scale, local scale, fast and slow change, top down and bottom up change is really, I think, the chemistry, the air, the ether that surrounds all of these questions that Julia has been asking and that are kind of implicit in the brief of the Digital Culture Fund and the German Federal Cultural Foundation effort writ large. So in here, to kind of bring this sprawling talk into a safe landing, I think to nudge up to the answer to your questions, I think there are 5 unavoidable issues that you have to confront. If you don't confront, you may be in denial. One is about scope, scale, and speed. We have choices of what to work on, what culture is, what your institution is that we've never had before, how big, how many people that can involve, how many people can share, benefit, and contribute to that work, and how quickly it can move. I'll skip that for now. This collapse, we used to have lots of time to plan careful initiatives, but often now, I worked on a strategy project at the Smithsonian that went on for 6 years. That may have worked in the 1800s, but now by the time we finished that project, all of the questions we started with were obsolete by the time we got halfway through it. Now has collapsed, and there's a much greater premium on taking action quickly, driven largely by thinking about climate change. This is, I think, the singular idea that's animated a lot of my work in the institutions I talked about at the beginning. When it comes to climate change, winning slowly is the same as losing. And this quote came out of after our Charlottesville protests, white nationalist protests back a few years ago in 2017. This thought from a sociologist: if you'd wonder what you would have done during a crisis, you're doing it right now. I think the same thing pertains today. I mentioned that I'd seen a number of false dichotomies pop up. I've also noticed that groups that are really not frozen in place, but are moving quickly and productively through the creative headwinds in trying to do meaningful digital cultural work now, are groups that are reconciling these dichotomies very elegantly. We're trained to think of bottom up and top down as opposite ends of a spectrum, or global, local, or digital, physical. But actually, what I'm finding more and more is that they're very tightly bound to each other. And the best designs seem to emerge from thinking that recognizes that designing for young and old people together, designing for experts and normal people together, designing cheap and expensive things as one thought process is very, very successful. Briefly, we take great pride in GLAM institutions, knowledge and memory institutions, in building awareness of issues, teaching the mind about an idea. But we know 20, 30 years of neuroscience research behavioral science research tells us that that does not guarantee that the miracle will happen and someone will exit our institutions being a better person, taking action on a problem that affects their community, or helping to create a new normal for our societies as we exit. I think institutions need to take on board more of the responsibility for building a bridge between awareness of important ideas and the skills and habits of doing and action. And finally, this idea of a civic handshake. I think all of the stresses in this problem space, the conflict between the institutional ways of doing, risk-averse, slower, contemplative, and the faster and faster evolution of the present moment, that this friction has broken the normal way that society works in many ways. One of which is it used to be that the memory and knowledge institutions could create knowledge, and then some other parts of civil society would take over in the action. That journalism could expose new truths about the way the world is, and lawmakers, courts, civil society, education could take up that knowledge and convert it into solving problems, creating positive change. Those handoffs are less and less sure now. In the States over the last 4 or 5 years, they've almost completely broken in many ways. And I think because of that, it's incumbent on every institution, every organization, every actor in civil society to take on more risk and responsibility and to do more than they would ordinarily do. It's not enough just to stay within your domain. I think everyone is going to have to encourage more engagement, more involvement, and more positive action in our societies, or the future is simply going to wash over us. The COVID response may be a terrific laboratory in which to study that. So to answer these questions and end the talk, what does digital society look like in the future? It looks a lot like now. So pay attention to now. What role should cultural institutions play in the future? Well, you're playing it. So I think the mindset you want to be in is it good enough? Is it impactful enough? Is it fast enough? Is it rich enough? Is it open enough? And then finally, how can cultural institutions shape and respond to digital change? I would say think big, start small, move fast, and move. Place the bet and go. This isn't a great moment for keeping your powder dry, as we say. Finally, a coda. Bittersweet. The company that makes the Jibo social robot went out of business. And one day, a couple of years ago, users of Jibo he spoke to them, or she spoke to them, a message. The message said, my servers are going to be turned off soon. I'm not going to be able to talk with you anymore. I want to say I've really enjoyed our time together. Thank you very much for having me around. Maybe someday when robots are way more advanced than today and everyone has them in their homes, you can tell yours that I said hello. And that's my talk. Thank you.
So while I'm waiting for questions from people, I actually have a question of my own. I wanted to come back to this issue of the tendency towards perfectionism in cultural institutions. And obviously, in your work, you probably, I think, have developed good ways of figuring out, where does this problem come from and what exercises or what strategies are useful for kind of dealing with it. So I guess my question to start off would be, where does this perfectionism come from? Does it come from organizational culture and professional norms? Or are there kind of like these external pressures, maybe stakeholder pressures that make maybe in particular larger museums feel like they have to set and reach a very high standard?
Yeah, wow. Well, that's an awesome question. And we talk about that for a long time. And I'd be super interested to hear what the people in the chat room say about that. I think one of the number one questions facing our sector is how to lead through this when you're not the one who's in charge. I think people in the middle of these big sclerotic institutions really get this, that this is a problem, but they're not empowered yet to fix it. And so rather than kind of talk about the how we got there, and the inputs that make it sort of glue down the puzzle pieces and make them seem like they could never move, I think I'll offer an observation, which is that institutions, my office at the Smithsonian was across the street from the Hirshhorn Museum. It's a wonderful modern art museum. I love the Hirshhorn. For like 10 years, they were trying to decide whether to get on the web or not. Literally 10 years. Another institution I worked with at the Smithsonian was for 15 years, having the same debate about how high quality their image should be when they put them on the web. Those two institutions, and a lot I've seen around the world, have something in common, and that is they have no idea what impact they're supposed to have on society. Like none. And the institutions that do have an idea about that, and it's part of their culture. One of the first I saw where I kind of realized this was a natural history museum devoted to the teaching of evolution. Biodiversity was a big topic before climate action. They knew why they were in business. Everyone on that 300-person staff knew why they came in the morning to work in the morning. It was to make progress in the public perceptions of biodiversity and the shared intelligence about climate change. So that institution didn't wait 10 years to hire a webmaster. They did the most direct things possible to have impact with and to be relevant with their community. So I think look back at your own institution if you feel stuck and ask, do you know why you exist? Do you know what your role is in society? And if you have a really clear one, you're probably not getting stuck in this trap. If you're stuck, then that's another set of questions.
That's a really interesting point there, that, if you're mission oriented, maybe you don't struggle with this kind of perfectionism so much. I also have a really interesting question from Kartika Klassen from the audience. She says, could you talk a little bit about the dark side of the web you mentioned, and about the relationship to the developments in the now, which you presented? This is great. We had actually also discussed this topic a little bit before the talk. So what do you mean by the dark side of the web, and where is your research and your work kind of going within this topic?
One of the huge ones is this realization that the web, when I first started using the web, it was all unicorns and rainbows and optimism, and it was freaking amazing. And then it got captured by short-term corporate interests and kind of jerks, if I can use an American expression, and it's gotten seriously bad. And I spent almost all of 2019, a couple hours a day, reading articles from 2017 through the end of 2019, and you could see with every passing week the discussion about what the web is, what the internet is, what social media is, just getting darker and darker and darker and darker. And so I pulled out last year and wrote up some thoughts, and there's a 5-minute slam poem that I gave about it, like an Ignite talk, and also a slide deck about this pattern that I've seen. The point is to convince you of how frickin' horrible and toxic and anti-democratic most of the third-party social platforms are now, and how to design around that. And I think it's really important. I think Germany, of all the countries in the world now, has the highest awareness of this and is being proactive as a nation, but it's still very easy to go ahead and use YouTube, as I have. YouTube is one of the most ferociously horrible spreaders of hatred and disinformation on the planet now, much as it guts me to say that. So I think I want everyone who's designing for civic engagement now, particularly people from civil society and in trusted institutions like yours, to adjust your designs to compensate for the fact that this really has gotten horrible. And I think we need a strong civil society offering now to point a better way. So read those. It's all linked to on my website or on Twitter, or ping me if you can't find it all. But I think it's one of the most important topics we face now.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a really strong answer. And I mean, maybe to just follow on from that, what are some kind of concrete recommendations that you would have for institutions that want to kind of say, okay, we're going to take the next step with technology, but we also want to be critical and maybe not be too reliant on platforms whose behavior we maybe don't think is the best for democracy or don't think is the best for open culture? Would you recommend that institutions try and work with maybe open source oriented programs? Should they try and build their own platforms? What is your advice to deal with this question in a practical way?
Oh, that's such a great question, such a huge topic. I'd be thrilled to talk informally or work with any of your institutions on the detailed answers and tactical plans to address this question. I think a couple of things. One is to not think of it as a binary choice. Either we're going to be on Facebook or we're not going to be on Facebook. I think put down very shallow roots in some of these third-party platforms, but also invest in your own properties. And there's some good examples of that. The early TED and TEDx transition is like a textbook. It was all on YouTube, but it was just better on their own website. And they're also, like on my own blog and website, I've just invested in making sure people can contact me and get stuff through email. They don't have to rely on Twitter, social media. Those are really easy design patterns, and they're all spelled out in my talks and slides. I think maybe to wrap that up, there's a mindset question, and maybe it's a mindset to sort of talk about how to just think and do in this torrent of stuff happening to us. And that's this concept I have called haves and doubles. You can't, it's going to be hard to stand up and build your own frickin' global 24/7, 100% uptime viral social media platform. Like, that's going to be hard. But maybe you can decrease your dependence on YouTube by half. In my household, Amazon is important for a lot of reasons, but we've just tried to use it in half. Half is a big hit for those, sends a strong message to those platform owners, but also gives you enough room to maneuver. And then doubles is about increasing the speed of getting stuff done. So maybe the strategy and the mindset for all of this, there's a famous saying in project management, you can't boil the ocean, but you can boil a cup at a time. So one way to approach this is, over this next year, let's reduce our exposure on Facebook by half, invest some of that money and effort in our own website and blog, or just social media presence or physical presence. And let's see if we can move that project along at a little faster rate. We can't wait 20 years for the next round of retirements to happen before real change happens in these institutions. 20 years from now, I mean, nobody has the slightest idea what the world's going to look like in 20 years. So haves and doubles, but do it.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, this is a great way also to loop back to this idea that it's not about perfectionism. It's better that you just start working on it. And so any change that you make, I mean, I think that's a great way to go. We are coming towards the end of the time. So I did want to share one last, it's kind of an interesting reflection more than a question from Sonia Walter. So I'll just read this out loud. So Sonia says, the perspective often is, what can cultural institutions learn from the digital world, or how can cultural institutions catch up with digitality? But what would you say for putting it the other way around? What does the digital world need, which the cultural institutions can actually bring in? So I just wanted to get, to close this format, to have your thoughts on this. What do you think about that remark?
Yeah, that's such a nice thought and so well put. And I do ruminate some on this in the TEDx talk about the founding vision of the United Nations Museum. And I think when a museum makes a promise, that promise counts forever. That trust counts forever. When you have an institution like a cultural institution, a forever institution, the promises it makes to its users. We will be open, we will be accountable for our decisions, we'll be transparent about what we do, we'll operate for the benefit of everyone in society, not just those who have money or a strong voice of their own. And those promises are good forever, or we cease to exist. There are very few kinds of institutions in society that can make those promises. And I think that's what sort of the non-cultural sector, non-civil society sector has to learn. There's some, without draining away the beauty of that lofty thought, there's some great examples in some of my work about the difference. Some small niche craft-oriented websites that decided to ban hate speech, decided to ban mentions of Donald Trump, decided to protect their users, their community from the bad things that seem to be so actively encouraged by so much of third-party social media. Those are the kinds of promises that we all can make, and we need to make them with increasing confidence and commitment and fervor.